was lovely, and I probably don't even need to preach now. I think I could just sit back down. That was gorgeous, and the words wonderful. Well, in case you didn't know, I'm Annie. I'm the new associate here, and I'm so excited to be in front of you this morning. But I will confess to you that I didn't mean to tell Jerry I would preach on World Communion Sunday. I told him I would preach. I said, why don't I preach my first Sunday here? That way people could get to know me. He said, great, that's World Communion Sunday. And I said, great. But as I thought about it more and more, I realized that this is a wonderful time for me to be coming before you as somebody new, but somebody who is now part of the community. Because World Communion Sunday is a day that we specifically remember that our faith, our walk with God, extends beyond this church, beyond the walls of Hayes First United Methodist, into the community of Hayes, into Kansas and the United States, and the whole world. We join together this morning with Christians across the globe. Our faith this morning is simultaneously diverse and broad and reaching, and yet intimate and familiar. We join with followers of God around the globe, across the ages, all of those who have come before God, celebrating communion. And this morning, we are calling it communion. Now, if you have a background in another faith tradition, like Catholicism, you've probably heard the name Eucharist. That's another name for what we're doing here this morning. It comes from Greek. It means thankfulness, so that's appropriate. And it's a time to be thankful before God. The church that I grew up in, we called it the Lord's Supper, also appropriate. But this morning, we are specifically calling it communion, and that's for a reason. The word communion comes from the same root as the word community, and that is what we're doing this morning. We are recognizing that participating in communion means participating in the work of God and joining with the community that is bigger and broader and farther reaching than any one of us, any one church, reaching beyond ourselves across the world. And community starts not with us, but with God. God is a triune God, three in one, three persons, one God. The very existence of God is community. And God created us to live and work in community as well, participating with one another here, with humans across the world, and participating with God. God chose to work with us. So let's think about what we're going to be doing when we take communion. Often we think about the breaking of the bread, the sharing of the cup, as something that was new, something that Jesus started. But actually, the practice was ancient, even when Jesus did that 2,000 years ago. The Sabbath tradition that Jesus and the disciples were doing was to say a blessing, break bread, always broken, not with a knife, because knives are instruments of war, conflict, breaking, so it's a sign of peace, and then sharing the bread and the cup as a family. Jesus and his disciples were doing that as part of the bigger celebration of Passover. So that's really important. Because Jesus said, as often as you do this, remember me. Jesus wasn't saying, hey, when you do this new thing every once in a while that I told you about, I want you to think of me. Jesus was saying, in the day-to-day, the ordinary, familiar parts of your lives, whenever you get together, remember me. Remember and include me in your celebration. Include me when you gather. And that brings us to the next part. Pause for a second and think about what it was that Jesus was asking his disciples to remember. It might not be what you and I generally expect. See, we often look at the symbolism, the body, the blood, and it points to Jesus' death and resurrection. But the Last Supper was before Jesus had died. So when Jesus was telling his disciples to remember, he couldn't have been asking them to remember his death because it hadn't happened yet. He was saying, remember me, remember my life. When you eat and drink, remember what my life was all about. And yes, we as Christians today have the full circle, and we can also think about Jesus' sacrifice and death and resurrection. But Jesus said, remember me. And Jesus was more than just that moment on the cross. Remember, every time I healed the sick, every time I ministered to those in pain, remember, every time I lifted up those who had been trampled by society, every time I crossed boundaries to reach out and rescue those who were lost or forgotten. Remember, every time I welcomed one of the outcasts into our midst, into our family. Remember, this morning when you come forward, drink that in. Let it wash through you. Not simply the death and resurrection of Jesus, but the fullness of life of Jesus Christ. We bring that into ourselves. Remember me. When we celebrate communion, we recognize God at work in our midst. And we invite God to be at work in us too. I'm going to read a part of this verse again for you. Paul writes, when we drink the cup of blessing, aren't we taking into ourselves the blood, the very life of Christ? And isn't it the same with the loaf of bread? Don't we take into ourselves the body, the very life of Christ? So, by participating in communion this morning, you are inviting that renewing and ever-reaching life of Christ into you, to be at work into you, to change you, and to make our fragmented selves whole again. Paul says, there is one loaf, and so our manyness becomes oneness. Christ doesn't become fragmented in us. Rather, we become unified in Christ. When we participate in communion this morning, we are allowing God to unite us with one another here at Hayes First United Methodist Church, to unite us with the Christians across Hayes who might not believe exactly the same things we believe, the Christians across Kansas and the Great Plains,